Hi everyone. I've never used Reddit before, but I saw some stories on TikTok a long time ago and decided to share my story. To be honest, I'd rather not know what it's like to share such a horrible cheating story. I'm Jack, and I've got a story for you that's been eating at me for weeks. My wife Emily cheated on me with her boss. And yes, those aren't real names. Yeah, you heard that right. Her rich, arrogant boss who probably saw her as just another conquest. But before we get too deep into that mess, let me take you back to the beginning so you can understand how we got here. Emily and I met in college. She was this bright, ambitious girl with dreams of making it big, and I was just a small-town guy trying to figure out my path. We clicked instantly. Our chemistry was undeniable, and before long, we were inseparable. We moved in together after graduation, got married, and bought a cozy little house in our hometown. For a while, everything was perfect. Emily landed a job at a big marketing firm, and I worked at a local garage. We had our routine, our little traditions, and life felt steady. But things started to shift when her firm got a new CEO, VDJ Richard. The guy was everything I wasn't: wealthy, powerful, and oozing charisma. Emily started working late more often. She'd come home, exhausted but with a strange glint in her eye. I noticed she was getting more secretive with her phone, and those late-night texts and work meetings became more frequent. My gut told me something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. I trusted her. One night, I decided to follow her. She said she had a late meeting, but something didn't sit right with me. I watched her leave, dressed to the nines, and I trailed her car from a distance. She drove to a swanky hotel downtown. My heart sank as I saw her meet Richard in the lobby. They laughed, touched, and then disappeared into an elevator together. I sat in my truck, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. This was real. My wife was cheating on me with her boss, and there I was, helpless. I drove home, my mind racing with anger and betrayal. When she got back, I confronted her. At first, she tried to lie, but the guilt was written all over her face. She admitted it. She said Richard had been giving her attention, making her feel special, and she'd fallen for it. Hearing her say it felt like a knife to the heart. She said it was a mistake, that she still loved me, but I couldn't look at her the same way. I packed a bag and left that night. Moved into a motel and tried to figure out my next steps. Now let me take you back a bit more so you can really understand where I'm coming from. Growing up, I was the kind of guy who believed in hard work and loyalty. My parents were married for over 40 years, and they always taught me that love meant sticking it out through the tough times. I brought that mindset into my marriage with Emily. I thought we had that kind of bond, that we were unbreakable. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs at you. Emily and I used to dream about starting a family, growing old together. We talked about our future, our hopes and fears. She was my best friend, my confidant. We built a life together, filled with memories, inside jokes, and a shared history that I thought would carry us through anything. When she got that job at the marketing firm, I was so proud of her. She worked hard, and I wanted to support her in every way I could. But as she climbed the corporate ladder, things started to change. She became more distant, more focused on her career. I tried to be understanding, but it felt like we were drifting apart. I never imagined she'd find solace in the arms of another man, especially someone like Richard. The guy had it all: VDJ money, power, charm. He was everything I wasn't, and I guess that's what drew her to him. But to me, he was just a rich jerk who didn't care about the lives he was destroying. Since I left, I've been trying to pick up the pieces. Emily's been calling and texting, begging me to come back, saying she made a mistake. But how can I trust her again? How can I go back to the way things were when everything feels so broken? I've been talking to a lawyer, trying to figure out the divorce process. It's overwhelming, but I know it's the right thing to do. I've thrown myself into work, hitting the gym, and trying to keep busy. But the nights are the hardest. The memories, the betrayal, VDJ, it all comes flooding back when I'm alone. Hey everyone, it's Jack again. Thanks for sticking with me through this mess. I've got a lot more to share, and it's only getting more intense. If you've been through something similar or just want to lend an ear, I appreciate it. So let's pick up where we left off. After discovering Emily's affair with her boss, Richard, my life became a whirlwind of lawyers, courtrooms, and confrontations. If you've ever been through a divorce, you know it's not just about ending a relationship. It's about untangling two lives that have been intertwined for years. And when there's betrayal involved, it's even messier. After I left the house and moved into that dingy motel, I started working with my lawyer, Tom. He's a good guy, tough as nails, and he doesn't take crap from anyone. We spent hours going over the details of my marriage, the finances, and what I wanted out of the divorce. Honestly, I just wanted it to be over, but Emily wasn't going to make it easy. Our first court hearing was a nightmare. Emily and her high-priced lawyer, no doubt funded by Richard, came in swinging. They wanted the house, the car, half of our savings, and even spousal support. Can you believe that? She cheats on me, and now she wants me to pay her for it. It was like a bad joke, but no one was laughing. Mr. Smith, Emily's lawyer began, my client has contributed significantly to the household and has sacrificed her career opportunities for the sake of this marriage. She is entitled to an equitable share of the marital assets, including the family home. I couldn't believe it. I glanced over at Emily, who avoided my eyes. It was like looking at a stranger. Fair share? I muttered. She's the one who cheated. Tom jumped in, his voice calm but firm. Your Honor, we contest this claim. Mrs. Smith's infidelity is the reason for this divorce. Mr. Smith has been a loyal and supportive husband, and it is unjust to reward such betrayal. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded thoughtfully. We'll need to review the evidence thoroughly before making any decisions. For now, both parties will retain temporary possession of their current assets. That was just the beginning. The real trouble started when our parents got involved. My parents, God bless them, were furious when they found out about Emily's affair. They had always treated her like their own daughter, and this felt like a betrayal not just to me, but to them as well. They couldn't understand how she could do something so hurtful. Emily's parents, on the other hand, were a different story. They were city folks, wealthy and well-connected, and they weren't shy about throwing their weight around. They showed up to court looking like they stepped out of a fashion magazine, ready to defend their daughter's honor. The courtroom became a battleground, not just for Emily and me, but for our families. My dad, a big guy with a booming voice, couldn't hold back his anger. How dare she, he bellowed, destroy our family like this, and now she wants to take everything my son worked for? Emily's mother, a refined woman with a sharp tongue, shot back. Your son drove her to this. He wasn't there for her, didn't support her ambitions. She had no choice but to seek comfort elsewhere. The judge had to call for order multiple times as the shouting matches erupted. It was pure chaos, and I felt like I was in the middle of a storm with no way out. Amidst all this, my so-called friends decided it was a good time to make things worse. One night, after another grueling day in court, I went to a bar with a few buddies to try and unwind. They thought it would be hilarious to make jokes about why Emily cheated. Hey, Jack, one of them slurred. Maybe if you weren't so small down there, she wouldn't have strayed. Ever think of that? I wanted to punch him right then and there, but I just took another swig of my beer, feeling the anger boil inside me. Real funny, guys, I muttered, trying to keep my cool. But they didn't stop. Seriously, Jack, maybe you should have invested in some enhancements instead of that fancy toolbox. Another one chimed in. I stormed out of the bar, leaving their laughter behind me. It was bad enough dealing with the divorce, but now my so-called friends were making me the butt of their jokes. It felt like the whole world was against me. The next day in court, things took another turn for the worse. Emily's lawyer presented a list of demands that included not just half of our assets, but spousal support as well. Given Mrs. Smith's current emotional state and the impact of the divorce on her career, she is seeking monthly support to maintain her standard of living, he argued. I couldn't believe it. She wants me to pay her for cheating on me? I whispered to Tom, barely able to contain my rage. Tom stood up, his face set in a grim line. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Mr. Smith has already suffered enough due to Mrs. Smith's infidelity. To demand spousal support under these circumstances is both unjust and unreasonable. But the judge, trying to remain impartial, decided that we needed more evidence before making any decisions. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks, she said. In the meantime, I suggest both parties try to come to an amicable agreement. Yeah, right. Like that was going to happen. As the weeks dragged on, the tension between our families only grew. My parents refused to back down, insisting that Emily should get nothing. Her parents were equally adamant that she deserved everything she was asking for. One particularly heated day, we all ended up in the same room for a mediation session. It was supposed to be a chance for us to talk things out, but it quickly turned into another shouting match. Jack has always been there for Emily, my mom said, her voice shaking with anger. He supported her, loved her, and this is how she repays him? Emily's dad leaned forward, his eyes cold. Your son may have been there physically, but emotionally he abandoned her. She had no choice but to find comfort elsewhere. I couldn't take it anymore. You have no idea what you're talking about, I snapped. I loved Emily with everything I had. She made the choice to cheat. That's on her, not me. Emily, who had been silent through most of the session, finally spoke up. I'm sorry, Jack, she said softly, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just so lonely. Her words cut deep, but I couldn't let myself be swayed. It's too late for apologies, I said. You made your choice, and now we all have to live with the consequences. The mediator, sensing that we were getting nowhere, ended the session early. I think we all need some time to cool off, she said. Let's reconvene in a few days. As we left, my dad put a hand on my shoulder. We'll get through this, son, he said. No matter what, we'll come out stronger on the other side. I nodded, but inside I wasn't so sure. The fight was taking its toll on me, and I didn't know how much more I could take. Back at the motel, I tried to unwind, but my mind kept racing. I thought about Emily, about our life together, and how everything had fallen apart. I thought about Richard, the man who had come between us, and the anger burned inside me. But most of all, I thought about the future. What would it look like? Would I ever be able to trust again? Would I find happiness, or was I destined to carry this pain forever? I didn't have any answers. All I knew was that I had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, the court battles continued. We fought over everything: VGA, the house, the car, even the damn toaster. It felt like we were splitting our lives down the middle, and it was exhausting. Every time I saw Emily, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. How had we ended up here? Then came the day of the big confrontation, VDJ, the day we were supposed to finalize the division of our property. The courtroom was packed, and the tension was palpable. My parents sat behind me, their support unwavering, while Emily's parents sat on the other side, glaring daggers at us. Emily's lawyer started the proceedings, listing all the assets she was claiming. Your Honor, my client is seeking half of the marital assets, including the family home, the cars, and a portion of Mr. Smith's retirement fund. She is also requesting spousal support due to the significant impact this divorce has had on her career. Tom was quick to respond. Your Honor, we contend that Mrs. Smith's infidelity is the direct cause of this divorce. Mr. Smith has already suffered enough, and it is unjust to demand such a large portion of the assets, especially spousal support. The judge listened carefully, her expression unreadable. I have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, she said finally. While infidelity is a serious matter, we must consider the legal aspects of asset division. My heart pounded as she continued. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you will each retain possession of your respective vehicles. The family home will be sold, and the proceeds divided equally. As for the retirement fund, it will be split 60-40 in favor of Mr. Smith, given the circumstances. I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was something. Then the judge turned to the issue of spousal support. Given Mrs. Smith's current financial situation and the emotional impact of the divorce, I'm inclined to grant temporary spousal support for a period of 6 months. I couldn't believe it. Temporary support? I muttered. This is unbelievable. Tom tried to argue, but the judge's decision was final. This is my ruling, she said firmly. We will reconvene in 6 months to reassess the situation. As we left the courtroom, my mom hugged me tightly. It's not over yet, Jack, she said. We'll get through this. I nodded, but the weight of the judge's decision hung heavy on me. Emily's parents looked smug, and I could see the satisfaction in their eyes. They thought they'd won. The next few weeks were a blur of packing and moving. Selling the house was painful. It held so many memories, VDJ, both good and bad. But it was a necessary step in moving forward. I found a small apartment not too far from work and started to rebuild my life. One night, while I was unpacking, I got a call from an old friend, Mike. We hadn't spoken in years, but he'd heard about the divorce and wanted to check in. "Hey man," he said, "I'm sorry to hear about everything. How are you holding up?" I sighed, feeling the exhaustion in my bones. "It's been rough, Mike. Really rough. I don't even know where to start." We talked for hours, reminiscing about the good old days and sharing our struggles. Mike had been through a tough divorce himself a few years back, and he gave me some advice. "Take it one day at a time, Jack. Focus on yourself. Do things that make you happy, and don't let the anger consume you." His words stuck with me. I started going to the gym more regularly, throwing myself into work, and even picking up old hobbies that I'd neglected over the years. Slowly but surely, I started to feel a little more like myself. But the battle wasn't over. Emily continued to reach out, sometimes with apologies, other times with demands. She wanted to meet, to talk things through, but I couldn't bring myself to face her. Not yet. Then came the final showdown VDJ, the court date to reassess the spousal support. I was nervous as hell, but Tom assured me we had a strong case. We walked into the courtroom, and I was determined to stand my ground. The judge reviewed the past 6 months and listened to our arguments. Emily's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim, struggling to make ends meet, but Tom was relentless. "Your Honor, Mr. Smith has made every effort to comply with the court's orders. However, it is clear that Mrs. Smith's actions have continued to impact his financial and emotional well-being. We request that the spousal support be terminated." The judge looked at Emily, then back at me. "I have considered all the evidence," she said. "While I sympathize with Mrs. Smith's situation, I find that continued spousal support is unwarranted. The support will be terminated effective immediately." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. Or so I thought. As we left the courtroom, Emily approached me. "Jack," she said softly, "can we talk?" I looked at her, the woman I once loved more than anything, and I felt a pang of sadness. "There's nothing left to say, Emily. We're done." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Jack, for everything. It's been a rough few months, and I've got a lot to share. So here's where things stand now." After the court finally terminated the spousal support, I thought I'd feel a sense of relief, like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And in some ways I did. But there was also this emptiness, a void that I didn't know how to fill. Emily and I had been together for so long, and despite everything, there was a part of me that missed her. Or maybe it was the life we had together that I missed. Either way, I found myself feeling lost. I moved into a small apartment not far from the garage where I work. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. I've been trying to make it feel like home, but it's tough. The walls are still pretty bare, and it doesn't have that lived-in feel yet. I guess that takes time. I threw myself into work, trying to keep busy. The guys at the garage have been great, always checking in on me and making sure I'm doing okay. But the nights are the hardest. That's when the loneliness really hits. I've been spending a lot of time at the gym, trying to stay in shape and keep my mind off things. It helps, but it's not a cure-all. One of the things that's been on my mind a lot is Emily. I heard through the grapevine that she's still working at the marketing firm, but things aren't going so well for her. Apparently, Richard, her boss and the guy she cheated on me with, moved on to his next conquest pretty quickly after our divorce was finalized. Emily was left to pick up the pieces, and from what I hear, she's struggling. I ran into a mutual friend at the grocery store a few weeks ago, and she filled me in. Emily's been having a tough time at work. The scandal of her affair with Richard got around, and it's hurt her reputation. She's been passed over for promotions, and her colleagues are keeping their distance. It sounds like she's pretty isolated, which is ironic considering how she isolated herself from me during the affair. Part of me feels sorry for her, but another part of me thinks she's getting what she deserves. I know that sounds harsh, but after everything she put me through, it's hard to muster up too much sympathy. Now, let's talk about my attempts at moving on. I figured the best way to get over Emily was to get back out there and start dating again. I joined a couple of dating apps, filled out my profiles, and started swiping. It was weird at first. I hadn't dated anyone other than Emily for years, and the whole online dating scene was new to me. I went on a few dates, and they were interesting, to say the least. The first one was with a woman named Sarah. She was nice enough, but there was no spark. We had dinner, made small talk, and by the end of the night, it was clear that we weren't a match. We parted ways amicably, and that was that. The next date was with a woman named Lisa. She was beautiful, smart, and we seemed to hit it off. But halfway through the date, she started talking about her ex-boyfriend and how terrible he was. It was like she was using me as a sounding board for all her unresolved issues. I tried to be supportive, but it was exhausting. By the end of the night, I was ready to call it quits. Then there was Michelle. She was fun, outgoing, and we had a great time together. We went out a few times, and I started to think that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to move on. But then she dropped the bombshell VDJ, she was still in love with her ex. She wasn't ready for a new relationship, and I was just a distraction. That one stung. I started to feel like maybe I was destined to be alone. Every time I thought I'd found someone I could connect with, it fell apart. I talked to my friend Mike about it, and he gave me some tough love. "Jack," he said, "you can't rush this. You're still healing. Give yourself time." He was right, of course. But it's hard to be patient when you're lonely. I wanted to believe that there was someone out there for me, but with each failed attempt, my hope dwindled. That's when I turned to you all for advice. I posted about my struggles on here, and the response was overwhelming. So many of you shared your own stories, offered words of encouragement, and gave me some solid advice. One comment that really stuck with me was from a guy named Dave. He said, "Jack, focus on yourself. Do things that make you happy. The right person will come along when you're ready." That's been my mantra ever since. I've been trying to focus on myself, to do things that bring me joy. I started hiking again, something I used to love but had neglected for years. There's something therapeutic about being out in nature, away from everything, just you and the wilderness. I've also been spending more time with friends and family. My parents have been a rock for me through all of this. They've been so supportive, always there to lend an ear or offer a shoulder to lean on. My dad especially has been great. We've been working on restoring an old car together, and it's been a good distraction. I've reconnected with some old friends too, people I'd lost touch with over the years. We've been hanging out, catching up, and it's been nice to have that sense of camaraderie again. It's a reminder that I'm not alone, even if it feels that way sometimes. One thing that's been tough, though, is dealing with the memories. Everywhere I go, there's something that reminds me of Emily, the park where we used to have picnics, the coffee shop where we'd spend lazy Sunday mornings, even the grocery store where we did our weekly shopping. It's like there's a ghost of our past life haunting me, and it's hard to escape. I've been seeing a therapist, too. That was another piece of advice I got from you all, and it's been really helpful. Talking to someone who's objective, who can help me process my emotions and make sense of everything, has been a game changer. It's not easy, and there are days when I feel like I'm making no progress at all, but I know it's a step in the right direction. As for Emily, I heard she's been trying to rebuild her life too. She's still working at the marketing firm, but from what I've heard, things are rough. The affair with Richard left a stain on her reputation that she's struggling to wash away. She's been passed over for promotions, and her colleagues are keeping their distance. It's ironic, really. She sought comfort in Richard, thinking it would make her life better, but it only made things worse. I haven't spoken to her since the court finalized the divorce. She's reached out a few times, sent me texts and emails, but I haven't responded. I need to move on, and staying in contact with her won't help. Maybe someday we can be civil, maybe even friends, but right now, it's too soon. A few days after posting that, the responses started pouring in. It was overwhelming, in a good way. People shared their own stories of heartbreak and recovery, offered words of wisdom, and provided a sense of community that I desperately needed. Here are a few that really stood out. One user, Jen, shared her story about moving on after her husband left her for another woman. "It took me years to finally feel whole again," she wrote. "But the key was focusing on myself and doing things that made me happy. Travel was my escape. Seeing new places, meeting new people VDJ. It reminded me that there was a whole world out there, waiting to be explored." Another user, Sam, gave me some tough love. "Jack, you've got to let go of the anger. It's natural to feel hurt and betrayed, but holding on to that anger will only eat you up inside. Find a way to forgive, not for her, but for yourself. It's the only way to truly move on." And then there was Mike, a guy who'd been through a similar situation. He offered practical advice on dating. "Take it slow," he said. "Don't rush into anything. Focus on building a connection first. And don't compare every woman you meet to Emily. Each person is different, and they deserve a fair chance." But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments of doubt, still nights when I'd lie awake, haunted by memories of the past. I'd think about Emily, about what we had and what we lost. I'd wonder if I'd ever find that kind of connection again. One night, after a particularly rough day, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of Emily and me, smiling and happy. It was like looking at a different life. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of closure. That chapter was over, and it was time to move on. I decided to reach out to Emily, to see how she was doing. It wasn't an easy decision, and I went back and forth on it for days. But I felt like it was something I needed to do, for both of us. I sent her a simple text. "Hey Emily, it's Jack. I hope you're doing well." She responded almost immediately. "Hi Jack, I'm doing okay. How about you?" We ended up chatting for a while, catching up on life. She told me about her struggles at work, how she was trying to rebuild her reputation. She apologized again for everything that happened, and I could tell she meant it. "I'm sorry too," I said, "for how things ended. I hope you find happiness, Emily." "You too, Jack," she replied. "I really hope you do." Hey everyone, it's Jack again. Thanks for sticking with me through all this. I've got something a bit more personal to share this time. Something I've been embarrassed to talk about, but I feel like it's important to get it off my chest. So here goes. This isn't easy for me to admit, but a long time ago, I wasn't the guy I am today. Back when I was in my first serious relationship, I made a mistake, VDJ, a big one. I cheated. Yeah, I know. It sounds hypocritical, especially after everything I've been through with Emily. But I think it's important to be honest, and maybe this is part of why I'm going through all of this now. Maybe it's karma. Let me take you back a bit. This was years before I met Emily, back when I was in college. I was dating a girl named Lisa. We'd been together for about a year and things were going well, or so I thought. But I was young, immature, and honestly a bit of an idiot. Lisa was sweet, kind, and she genuinely cared about me, but I took her for granted. I was more focused on partying, hanging out with friends, and being young and carefree. I didn't appreciate what I had. Then, during my sophomore year, I met another girl at a party. Her name was Jessica. She was wild, fun, and everything that seemed exciting at the time. We started talking. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were sneaking around behind Lisa's back. I justified it to myself in all sorts of ways. I told myself that Lisa and I weren't that serious, that it was just a fling, that I wasn't hurting anyone. But deep down, I knew it was wrong. I knew I was betraying someone who trusted me. It all came crashing down when Lisa found out. She saw a text from Jessica on my phone, and that was it. She confronted me, tears streaming down her face, and I had no excuses. I admitted everything, and she was devastated. She broke up with me on the spot, and I couldn't blame her. Seeing the pain I caused her was a wake-up call. I realized how selfish I'd been, how I'd hurt someone who didn't deserve it. It took me a long time to come to terms with what I'd done, and I vowed never to make that mistake again. When I met Emily, I was determined to be a better man. I wanted to be faithful, to be the kind of partner she deserved, and for a long time, I was. But now, looking back, I wonder if what happened with Emily is some kind of cosmic payback for what I did to Lisa. Maybe it's karma. Maybe I needed to experience that kind of betrayal to truly understand the pain I caused. I don't know, but I do know that it's made me reflect on my actions and strive to be a better person. I reached out to Lisa a few months ago, after everything with Emily went down. I apologized for what I did, for the hurt I caused her. She was surprised to hear from me, but she appreciated the apology. We talked for a while, and it was good to clear the air. She's moved on, found happiness, and that made me feel a little better. But the guilt still lingers. Maybe that's why I've struggled so much with Emily's betrayal. It's like looking in a mirror and seeing my own mistakes reflected back at me. I wanted to share this with you all because I think it's important to own up to our past, to acknowledge our mistakes. It's not easy, and it's not something I'm proud of, but it's part of who I am. And maybe by sharing this, I can finally start to forgive myself. So, that's it. That's the part of my story I've been too embarrassed to share. If you've got any thoughts or advice, I'd love to hear it. Thanks for listening and for being there. Your support means more than you know.